Understood, yes. Great. Okay, let's go.
Okay, great. So Wayne, you can start the live stream, and we're good to go. Let me know. All right, thank you. Hello, and welcome to today's meeting of the Academic and Strategic Initiatives Committee. I do want to remind everyone that this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube for the general public, and all audio and video is being captured and recorded. Heather, will you please call roll?
Absolutely. Mr. Hamid Barber, Mr. Colby Burks.
I'm here.
Mr. Ben Brandsetter will be joining us shortly. Ms. Lori Harper.
Here.
Mr. Lucas Minzer. Ms. Vidya Ravichandran.
Here.
Dr. Robert Satt.
Here.
Mr. Kevin Weaver.
Here.
All right, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. We had a ASI meeting on January 12th, and the minutes from those meetings were in your materials. Are there any objections to those as presented? If none, they are approved as distributed. Thank you. Our real action item or to do today really has to do with the statewide strategic agenda. So again, this is a really, really important task that we have at hand. So it does require everybody's thoughtful input and things like that. So I would really appreciate that. Let's be candid, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Thompson for a few comments.
Thank you, Chair Harper. Last week's meeting, I think, pointed to a lot of things. Those that I think we all can agree we've done very well operationally, those that we've done strategically well, but also pointed to a few holes that we have to consider as we think about this agenda. I made mention last time the difference between a strategic agenda and a strategic plan. I mean, what we're setting truly is the direction that we need for the state to go in order to have a workforce that's qualified, a populace that's educated, a poverty line that is going in the direction where we're at now in a positive direction, and that we make sure that everybody gets engaged in all of that. So it is about equity, it is about quality, but it's also about quantity, yes. The idea that we've been given this opportunity in law to do this, I think, is a blessing because we've seen that we can do it. Our North Star is 20 by 30. That's what we should be thinking about as we direct ourselves toward this. But more than anything else, that we're really serving live people. We're really asking each campus to build a roadmap, their planning process around this direction that we're setting for the state. So our footprint's big. And it's warranted, and we've shown that we can do it well. I like this process simply because it forces us to look at what we've done to continuously improve while looking at what we still need to do. This is a strategic process and not an operational process. And I think that's important as we have the discussions. The last thing I'll say before letting you folk really do the hard work is that it seems to me that we're called now more than ever to think about what it means in a time of uproar, turmoil, and what it means in a time that many people are suffering, that we've been able to see who, in fact, haven't benefited from higher ed and what that does to them, their family, and their generations. We've been set to work with other units around the state, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's health and human services, whether it's our business and industry, to talk about how we do this together. We've set forth an agenda that is strategic in education, that's systematic, at least the way we look at it, and know that it crosses many boundaries. What I would ask us to do, at least from the presidents of higher ed, if you want to call it that, is to say, yes, this is a higher ed agenda, but it's a higher ed agenda that forces us to understand the role that we play in order to make sure everybody else understands that we can be critical, we can be creative, and that we have the ability truly to put forth something that is stretched at times and something that is achievable at times, but at all times it's something that we can all generate ourselves around in whatever role we play. So, Chair, that's my little speech, and I hope that's okay.
All right, that's fine. So then I guess, Lee, you want to take us from here, or who's?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair Harper. And Heather, if you could put up the PowerPoint. Great, thanks. Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I'm going to echo some of what President Thompson has just talked about. We're going to spend most of the meeting today in a facilitated discussion about the strategic agenda development process and really get your thoughts about the information that would be helpful to you to make decisions, the groups that we need to be talking with, the timeline, key issues the committee should be thinking about as it jumps into this work. But before we do that, and I think this is particularly important for the newer members, we thought it would be a good idea to spend a couple of minutes giving you some background and context about the strategic agenda. So hopefully this will spark some additional thought for the conversation to follow. Heather, next slide, please. So to talk about Kentucky's strategic agenda, we need to go back a couple of decades to give a little history about higher education reform and improvement efforts of the 1990s. Dr. Satt may remember some of the concerns that have been growing for some time about Kentucky's poor economic and workforce competitiveness issues with other states. We had some of the lowest per capita income in the country, regularly ranked number 50. We had extremely low levels of educational attainment, both from high school and from college. We lost so many of our Kentucky high school graduates to out-of-state colleges and universities, and there were endless turf battles among campuses for resources. And also there was limited research and development capacity at UK and U of L. Perhaps most important for this conversation, there was a recognition that there was weak state level coordination and leadership in what was at the time the Council on Higher Education. So Governor Patton took on the reform and improvement of Kentucky higher education as his most pressing issue when he was elected in the mid-1990s. He saw higher education as deeply connected to the state's prosperity and the ability to lure and create jobs. So after about a year of study and a lot of public discussion and conversation and a very difficult political fight, the Post-Secondary Improvement Act was passed in 1997. Heather, next slide, please. Probably the most visible result of the act was the elevation of technical education as a full partner in the higher education system. The fragmented system of vocational technical colleges was merged with UK's community college system, and then the whole entity was made independent as the KCTCS system. The new law positioned UK and U of L to grow and strengthen their research capacity through programs like Bucks for Brains. The comprehensive campuses were identified as key providers of bachelor's and master's level education with one or more programs that highlighted their particular strengths. But not talked about as much was the focus in the act on strengthening state level leadership and coordination. The Council on Higher Education was disbanded. CPE was formed and comprised of citizens like you representing the interests of the state as a whole, as opposed to representing a specific institution. In particular, CPE was charged with providing vision and leadership through the development of a strategic agenda for post-secondary education, with goals and objectives responding to state needs. CPE was also charged with developing a strong accountability system to monitor and communicate the progress on those goals. Next slide, please. Some of you have seen this slide before, and this really builds on some of the comments that President Thompson just made. But we think it's useful to talk about what the agenda is and what it isn't when you jump into this work. As President Thompson mentioned, there's a difference between a strategic plan and a strategic agenda, at least in the context of this work. While a strategic plan generally drives the work of a single organization and is often implemented at a fairly operational level, this strategic agenda is meant to provide high-level guidance and vision to campuses and key partners. It's an agenda that should inform and provide a basis for campus strategic planning and their own priority setting. It's also an agenda that's meant to be communicated and understood by everybody, from policymakers to parents to faculty members to the general public. It's really meant to tell the story of post-secondary education in Kentucky and what it values and how it is linked to Kentucky's future. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I think it's useful to see the continuity of this work and the various iterations of the agendas that CPE has created since the late 1990s. There's been a lot of commonality in the approach that's been taken to developing the agendas over the years. All have included broad stakeholder input as they are being developed and strong accountability structures that focus on outcomes like degrees and graduation rates and educational attainment. Next slide, please. You all have seen this slide many times, but our 60 by 30 goal is our North Star. It's the guiding goal of the current agenda. We set this goal after lots of work with a national higher education policy organization that took a deep dive into the key goal of the Reform Act, which was to raise the level of education to at least the national average. David has shared with the committee that CPE staff is working on a deeper analysis of the 60 by 30 goal to really look deeply into where Kentucky should focus in terms of education levels. So, do we need to focus on, for example, bachelor's degrees or more on associate's degrees or certificates? And then what disciplines are most important for us to be focused on? Where are the gaps in terms of our demographic groups? And what regions of the state are advancing in terms of educational attainment while others might be struggling? So this information should also really help you as you develop the new agenda. Next slide, please. These are some of the headwinds or challenges that this board has talked about on many occasions, including with the presidents in their report last week. None of these challenges are surprising, but as the committee begins conversations about where to focus policy attention, it's helpful to keep some of these in mind. And, I want to reiterate some of the things that were said last week. While we tend to focus on the challenges and the problems and, what is blocking progress, it is important to emphasize how much Kentucky's post-secondary system has made extraordinary progress just since 2016 with this agenda, and certainly since 1997. From the growth in research capacity at the research institutions to really significant progress of our underrepresented minority populations, to the overall rate and volume of our graduates. There really has been tremendous progress over the years, but certainly we have our work cut out for us in the next decade. Next slide, please. We should also note that there has been a lot of good work in the state to build on, so we're not starting from scratch. Kentucky has the best educational data system in the country, and much of that is housed here at CPE. So that will help enormously pinpoint issues and identify solutions. As a number of the presidents mentioned last week, the level of cooperation among the campuses has never been higher. And I would add that there's a level of cooperation and information sharing among the state's education and workforce agencies that's never been higher. The pandemic has been hugely challenging, but it's also taught campuses how flexible and adaptable they can be in terms of technology and innovative approaches to course delivery. And finally, there are so many examples in the state of innovative approaches to supporting students and improving program quality and creating efficiencies in program delivery and helping close achievement gaps. So, hopefully as the board develops this new agenda, it can highlight and scale some of this work so that the full system can benefit. Heather, next slide. This is just a visual reminder of how higher education exists in an interdependent environment. I think we all know we cannot be successful unless our P12 partners are successful. in providing us with well-prepared students, and they cannot be successful, without qualified teachers that come from higher education. Likewise, Kentucky's economy depends on strong graduates from colleges, universities, and, higher ed depends on an economy for continued support. So, I think it's just useful as we think about the post-secondary agenda that really we're talking about a broad collaborative effort that's going to have to occur from really post K-12 through the workforce. Heather, next slide, please. I'm not going to stop on this slide except to say that these are some of the questions this committee will need to think about as it develops and finalizes the agenda. I think you'll begin to touch on some of these in the conversations today. Next slide, please. And you'll also be discussing the charge of this committee today. But based on the work of past steering committees, a successful agenda will depend on this group to provide high-level guidance and vision for the work. The group will need to provide ongoing direction to staff, determine the needed stakeholder input, develop a timeline for the work. You'll be developing the priorities, goals, and strategies and measures of progress, and will present status updates regularly to the board and a final agenda to the full board for adoption, in the next months to come. Heather, next slide. And then finally, I wanted the committee to be aware of the core staff team that will be working on this project. The whole CPE staff will be involved to some extent throughout this process, but these are the folks that you'll be seeing at most of the meetings and will help you with a lot of this work. And we're available to be called on at any point you need us. I'm also very pleased to introduce Stephanie Ashley, Director of the EKU Facilitation Center, who will be another key partner in this work. Her group helped us facilitate some of the highly successful policy group discussions during the last agenda development process, and she will be working with us even more closely this time to help advance the conversation and ensure that we have an effective process that's very inclusive. So Stephanie, I will turn it over to you.
Stephanie, you're muted.
Muted. Yay. I was the first to do it. Okay, so everybody can feel comfortable in doing it now because I'm going to create some space and time for you all to talk. But what I was saying that you couldn't hear while I was muted is that I am excited to work with you all and on this project, and I'm looking forward to it. Since you all know each other well, we're not going to do any introductions or anything like that. And as far as names, I'm just going to go off what you've got in Zoom. So I did catch a couple of, at least one Dr. and a Chair Harper, and I'll try to remember those things. But if you go by something that's not how you are presented in Zoom, if you would change that to whatever you go by, you can just hover your mouse over your camera, click those three little dots in the corner and rename yourself. But I wanted to share with you a little bit about my role. I'm going to talk a little more specifically about it in a few moments about strategic planning. But for these meetings, I am with Facilitation Center at Eastern Kentucky University, but I'm not here representing EKU. I'm a neutral party here to guide the process and not the content. Create space and time for you all to talk about the strategic agenda for Kentucky. And so with that, I'm going to share with you my screen and just give you an overview of what we're going to do for the next hour and 40 minutes or so. So we are the purpose of this afternoon session is for you all to make recommendations on the process used to develop the strategic agenda. Outcomes, these are the things we hope to leave with at 4 o'clock when this meeting wraps up. And that's clarity on roles and responsibilities for the upcoming planning process. So who's doing what? 2, recommendations on key input. So what information will this committee need to make informed recommendations? And then that's related to the third outcome, recommendations on the individuals and or groups best suited to provide that key information. So we're going to go a little bit over the process, but that gives you an idea of where we're headed. And I've got a graphic here that I will share with you to sort of go over the process that starts with the roles and responsibilities. And if you
Is there any
would,
way to make that larger?
there is, and I will do that for you. I was also going to pop it in the chat, the link to it, that if you want to open it on your own screen and drive yourself, you're welcome to do that too. So I popped that link in the chat. So this is an overview of the process. In the blue are roles and responsibilities, and I'll briefly go over that first because I want to make sure that everybody's clear on who is doing what and make sure we work through any questions so that you feel comfortable in the work that lies ahead. The first two rows are for the board and this committee. And at a broad view of your role and responsibility is to provide high-level vision and guidance for the strategic agenda. And if you break that down, the role and responsibility of the board is to engage in the development of the mission, vision, and core values, engage in updates from the ASI committee, approve a final agenda, and then monitor ongoing progress and adjust when necessary. And then the work of this committee is similar. This is what Lee had on her PowerPoint that she shared with you, what you're responsible for. And that's to steer the development of the agenda and provide direction to staff. And a good example of that is what you're doing today. You're going to share what you see as important information to collect as a part of making recommendations for the state on priorities. Solicit and review the input that's collected from campus leaders, key stakeholders, and policy experts. So you're going to analyze that data and determine what it means and what can be done about it. Recommend priorities, goals, strategies, and performance measures based on feedback. So this group will make the recommendations, then move forward. One thing that I will share with you is you don't have to engage too much in wordsmithing, which I know if you've done strategic planning before can be a little laborious to spend a 30-minute conversation debating the word happy versus glad. And verbiage is really important in many occasions, but that's not something you have to worry about at this level. Want to keep you focused on the content and the context of things and not so much about the words unless you deem it important. You will also provide updates and progress reports to the full CPE board and review agenda drafts and present final product to the CPE board for adoption. So it's a very important role. And then the CPE leadership staff and the Facilitation Center, we are here to provide expertise, support, and boots on the ground to implement the guidance that you are providing and sharing. So the CPE leadership and staff will coordinate the planning process, define and implement environmental scan collection methods, summarize environmental scan into a digestible format if you're responsible for analyzing it so you don't feel like you've had to drink from a fire hose. We'll try to summarize and get it to you in digestible pieces. And this will cross between the CPE staff and our staff here at the center. Draft the written agenda, which includes the final wordsmithing, finalize strategies and measures, guide the development of the performance measures and targets, and support and inform the committee and the CPE board throughout the planning process. And then for the Facilitation Center, manage the qualitative data collection process, such as the forums, executive interviews, whatever is we come out of this meeting with. Be a collaborative partner throughout the entire process. There is no cookie cutter strategic plan or cookie cutter strategic planning process. It is truly what works best for you and your group. I certainly do a lot of these. I am based at EKU, but 95% of my work is off campus. I work with local groups everywhere from Link Belt to the Bluegrass Workforce Innovation Board on strategic plans to national groups. I'm working on one with the College of William and Mary right now. So I have things that I will offer the group that may be best practice or that I've heard that may fit what you need. But if I offer it, it doesn't mean you have to take it. It's just an offering because you know what's best for your group. So that's a little more about my role in being a collaborative partner. Facilitate these meetings, and if necessary, any of the board meetings where we're talking about strategic planning. Provide regular updates and progress reports, and facilitate the process and not the content, being mindful of timelines and next steps. So any questions about roles, responsibilities, anything that we need to clarify, anything you're not sure about, or did we miss anything?
Just a quick question on the key deliverables for our meeting for today. This is a little bit more broad-based and broad strokes. So are we able to specifically narrow down what it is that we want to do at the end of our session today?
As far as recommendations on key input?
Yeah.
We will talk about that and we'll brainstorm ideas about topics that you all deem are important when you think about planning for the future. What are the things that you believe you'll need to know?
Is that for the next year? Is that for the next 3 years? You know, what kind of time frame are we allocating to these initiatives that we deem are critical?
Excellent question. And we are going to talk about timelines, and I believe Lee might have some information about that too to share. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up with the group is the timeline and when this is for. So that will be a group discussion as well as a part of that. Thank you. Because it's hard to determine priorities or goals if you don't know what the time frame. Yeah. Any other questions of clarification?
Not at the minute. It's a lot to digest right now.
Okay. And the other thing about my role is anything that you see in writing goes in a report. I know you all do formal minutes, but I will do a report of our sessions as well. So you will see this all again. I'll jump into the very broad overview of the process that we've outlined. The first part is this in the green, the environmental scan, and identify relevant data, stakeholders, and effective collection methods, which is what we're talking about today. Once that's identified, then it's the collection process and gathering all of that information and then sharing the findings. This is a somewhat flexible and fluid process because if we determine something today and you make recommendations and we get into this and you realize, oh, you know what, we really need to find this out. It's okay. Nothing is etched in stone. We can certainly adapt as necessary. And I really applaud CPE for historically really investing in this process. We believe it's really beneficial for a couple of reasons. It challenges organizational assumptions. It enables creativity and innovation. And I'll actually give you a quick example of that. I'm going to give you a phrase and see if you can finish it for me. 1, 2.
Three, 4.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense, right? That's logical. That's an assumption and very valid. But what I was actually thinking was 1, 2, buckle my shoe. 3, 4, shut the door. Good, good. Because usually those gut reactions we have to things, those are normal, logical assumptions, tried and true, but that doesn't necessarily make them creative or innovative. Oftentimes those gut reactions to things are not going to be creative and innovative. Those are the things we know. Those are the things we know. So it's a good example of why it's so wonderful you all are going through this process. Identify important gaps and opportunities, provide a common perspective, and allow opportunity for feedback and broader views. And again, this is something CPE has done really well in the past, in including feedback and broader views to inform the planning. And part of what we want to keep in context as we think about the planning for this time. Sort of simultaneously with this is building the framework, which is consensus on organizational mission, vision, and core values. We suggest to groups your strategic plan should be vision focused, mission led, and values based, and that these are really important core principles that need to be well defined and agreed upon before you determine your priorities. Because it's similar to the point about timeline. If you don't know ultimately where you want to go, how are you going to define how to get there? And these two things in the green and the blue happen before you develop the actual agenda and your priorities. So the development of the agenda is to utilize the results from the environmental scan and the framework discussion to develop your priorities. Then define success, such as outcome-based measures, and then outline how the plan will be achieved so that you can ultimately reach that strategic agenda. And I wanted to ask, since Lee brought it up and Dr. Thompson brought it up, your North Star has a date attached to it, 2030. So I don't know that a finite timeline has been determined for this strategic agenda. And so I wondered how this 60 by 30 fits in to the strategic agenda. And I'll stop sharing my screen so we could look at each other while we have a conversation.
Yeah, this Ben, in my mind, I think I'd like to see this iteration of the strategic agenda take us through 2030, since that is kind of our North Star, what we've been talking about. Probably establish some benchmarks where we would do a short review of it, maybe in 2024, 2027 timeframe. But in my mind, I'm concerned if we just go to 2025, 26, or 27, we're like almost there. We might as well just go on to 2030. But that was my thought.
Thank you. Other reactions?
I think we need some review. Well, you put reviews in there as well, and significant time for modifications if needed.
Right.
And Dr. Stat, what I was thinking was if we go ahead and in the plan, lay out when those should be and kind of like the time frame, like in my mind, do it the first half of 2024, and that way it kind of bookends when those adjustments and edits can be made to kind of just to create an artificial timeline so it can get done. That kind of marries up with our normal meeting schedules, such that take 2024, for example. If we want to say it needs to be done by June of 2024, that can hit our typical June meeting cycle. And that way, otherwise I'm concerned it's going to bleed on into later on in the third quarter.
Thank you.
And first of all, I agree. I think that is a good way of thinking about it. A plan is dynamic anyway. It's not like an artificial end date gets you anything. This aligns the end date with the North Star. The interesting thing I like about this too, if you think of formative assessments, if you think of continuous improvement in a formative manner, this could allow that to happen. I mean, you may have some set dates of 24 and 27, but this allows you also to have some real formative opportunities at any strategic retreat we have every year, being able to really connect those with trajectories, predictive analytics, all different kinds of things as we move toward that. So I do like this idea.
That sounding trite, seems like you're suggesting that the agenda should be a 40,000 foot view of the process, at which time we get in and start getting into details as we go along.
To me, it aligns with the vision of having a healthy society and a workforce with education, but at least some credential that matters by 2030. So yes, I mean, that is what an agenda should be, right? And then we can get to the microscopic elements of that and even offer some real prediction, because one of the tricky things here is that we measure degrees in four-year institutions over a 6-year period, but yet we have a 5-year timeline in many ways, right? So you can see a lot of ongoing dynamics if you have a little bit longer, time to look at this. So yes, I think Dr. Stat, that is exactly what it sounds like to me too.
Thank you. Does a 10-year plan, even a high level plan, does that give any of you pause or concern that you want to share?
Not because we have a primary focus, a very finite focus, and there's so many things that go into it that we need the flexibility to attack those. But the plan itself is very, well, you called it the North Star plan or whatever. That's where we're at, and that's where we've got to go.
And Stephanie, not to correct you on this, but this is an agenda, which really gets, I think we've gotten stuck in our minds of strategic plans 3, 4, and 5 years. So I would ask us to release that piece. If not, we'll end up really always referring to it and forgetting our North Star, which is how we're thinking about this agenda as we build it, if that makes some sense.
Yes, it does to me.
And I don't have a problem with the length of it, as long as we've got those steps in between when we're going and reviewing and assessing and seeing and adapting. Because again, it's a work piece. It's something that needs to be adaptive as things change in some respects.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Thompson, a good example of when verbiage matters, when happy to glad matters, plan versus agenda. And so that was out of habit. So you're right, it is an important distinction. Okay.
One last thing I throw in, if we're really lucky, we will have reached our North Star before 2030. And if that happens, then then it's not necessarily that this will change, or plan won't change, or our agenda won't change. What it means, though, is we look at pushing that agenda forward. The ideal is to reach it and move past it. It's not just to reach it. So I like it in that sense of the word, too.
It's not an end point.
Yeah, Aaron, I filed that one under, that's a good problem to have.
All right.
Maybe I'm jumping a little too far ahead or something like this, but you, in some of your, that colored slide, comments about constituent comments, that sort of thing. Are we looking at or thinking of having group sessions, hearings, anything like that? Is that in the mix, or is it strictly staff and committee?
That is for this group to make recommendations on. There was a planning meeting with staff to work out some very operational logistic things and do some initial brainstorming, but that's where we're going to go next, is talk about what information do you need and who do you need it from.
So I'm premature.
No, you're right on target. You're right on target. But I wanted to back up just a little to the slides that Lee had offered, the opportunities to advance progress and some of the challenges of getting to 60 by 30, because I think talking about that may help us as you're thinking about key input. And I'll, just for reference, so you have them in front of you again, I'll share my screen. But what Lee shared as opportunities was to build on growing levels of cooperation, maximize the power of strong data, scale strong program systems and strategies that are bridging divides, explore new models of program delivery, financing, and student support, and capitalize on lessons learned from the pandemic. Do you see other opportunities as we think about 10 years down the road, 9 years down the road, that put Kentucky in a position of strength?
maybe this is relevant, but with the presidents, one of the things that we heard over last week was the messaging of the return on investment and how we're not really getting the message out to a lot of people that education is important. And we've got to do that, get that out there to advance some of the progress that's being outlined.
Thank you. Would you say that's more of a challenge?
Yes, it is a challenge.
Okay. Because we're going to talk about those specifically too. And we can talk about them at the same time. This is also what Lee offered that has come up from the presidents and your own discussions about the demand for job-ready graduates, shifting workforce needs, effects of the pandemic, traditional students, all the things you can see here. What would you add to it, or opportunities?
Well, in that regard, Lee hit at the public skepticism about higher ed's return on investment. And one of the numbers that I heard over last week was that 10% of the underrepresented minorities or low income feel that they are college material. We've got to we've got to educate them into thinking that, and that's public skepticism. 90% are skeptics that they can't do it. How do we change that?
Yeah.
And that to me is a very major aspect.
Dr. Stead, I would even say that might be a separate challenge. You know, that there is this belief gap that people can actually achieve what we know they can achieve. And so
Okay.
I'm glad you raised that.
I actually think it's excellent. I think that's exactly right. I think that's one of our core problems. I mean, we heard that on a listening tour, that we had so many people that actually were doing well academically who just didn't believe they were college material and really didn't have a way to be fed that. So I think that those have multiple tentacles on it. I mean, just that one statement there, and I think it's big. Another one I will throw out there, I think it's important. We have started using data in the last 4 or 5 years, unlike I've ever seen. We're going to get far more microscopic when we go on campuses. We're going to see professors and other people, even students, be able to grab the data that we couldn't even grab as been in their position 5 years ago. They're going to be able to use data at a lot faster rate and be able, hopefully, to have the tools technologically and other ways to then be able to quickly act on turning the learning corner, I guess. So I think we'll be far more high level in technology and the way we use our data.
Thank you. Other opportunities or challenges?
I don't know if Lee captured this, but let me just speak it out. And then if it's captured, then fine. We're going to see a lot more diverse student body, a lot more diverse workforce, and we're going to see a lot more first generation students, believe it or not, in many ways. So that is both an opportunity and a challenge if we don't address the needs of those students, before they get there and then once they're there. So I would, I know, Lee, you were trying to get to that on some of those, but I don't know if I fully see that expressed. We know that's going to happen. Right now, at least 25% of the national students at a traditional age going to college are what we consider, once again, first generation. And that first generation looks different than my first generation, right? Because many of these first generations are not, English is not their native word, but we see a lot more wealthy students going to college than we ever have. So this bifurcation is going to be really big. So I think there's another kind of gap we'll have to look at.
Dr. Thompson, you say the needs are going to be different, or the students have needs. How do we identify those needs?
By
You're a
asking
sociologist.
Yeah, by exactly what we've done to even increase where we're at now. We're going to the student more, and we're not going to we're moving from a teaching paradigm to a learner's paradigm. And all of these things are things we weren't taught to do as people getting their PhDs, as I did 30-some years ago. We were taught how to do research and come in, and we just had knowledge to share. We were sages on the stage, right? So the idea that we know that we're not going to reach these unless we figure out how to create a way to change that to a learner's mode. In other words, find out from the students, what are those needs you have? But a part of that, we have to educate them to understand how to ask for it, or how to have the nomenclature, or how to figure out how we need to have what I call the human infrastructures and technological infrastructure too inside the institution to provide them with the needs that they will surely be able, hopefully, to ask for.
And I'd like to add on to Dr. Thompson's thoughts on that. I think it's self-advocacy for things that they didn't even know how to advocate for before, but I also think it's the willingness for the institutions to be willing to change, to adapt to what those needs are. It may not be the typical needs, or it may need a little bit more intentional or intensive wraparound support, which is what we're seeing at the K-12 level too, of just providing what is actually needed versus what we've always provided. It's very different. So
a challenge is becoming a more of a learner-centered environment as opposed to a teacher-centered environment.
And it's an opportunity also, a challenge and an opportunity.
Okay.
Another thing.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, just one more challenge that I think we should keep front and center here is one of the few proven things that have helped, at least, based on some statistics, is the dual enrollment, that it's really helped with the continuum to some extent. But the access of dual enrollment across the Commonwealth, access of opportunities for kids to avail of this is very, very low. So there are a few select places where that is available, but by and large, this is not as commonplace as it should be if this is one of the proven techniques that we have for enabling people to make that leap into post-secondary. So this should not be something that's available in as select places as it is, and really something that becomes much more accessible and available. And the other challenge, I'm speaking from firsthand experience of, having a student gone through dual enrollment, in the way that this is available in some of the high schools is it's only available for certain specific select universities. So if you have a dual enrollment class that you take in a specific high school, it's not transferable to any of the colleges in the Commonwealth. It's tied to a university. So therefore, if you are a high school student enrolled in a dual enrollment class, you can only go and transfer your courses to that particular university. So if it's tied to EKU and you want to go to WKU, or you want to go to a different university, at least, I'm talking about 4-year-old data, so that may have changed. But that is something that should become very easily transferable from every high school to any university within the Commonwealth, because it's got to be fewer barriers to getting them into these institutions and not more barriers.
I just want to say that let's not limit it to dual enrollment, dual credit. Let's talk about any advanced placement, high rigorous course.
100%, absolutely.
Because it is both of those. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Kevin, were you going to share something?
Yes, what I was going to ask. I'm new to this whole process, just joining the board recently, or the council, and the focus or a lot of the conversation is rightfully on those who might not otherwise be going to onto a higher education. But I'm wondering where it says increasingly competitive higher education environment, is that talking about focusing on competing for our students who are the higher performers and that we might be losing out of state?
I think it's all of the above, Kevin, at least as I was thinking about it. I think that community colleges are competing with comprehensive universities for students. I think we're competing for our best and brightest. We certainly, I think the higher ed community is competing for funding for sustainability, both philanthropic and public funds. And, and President Thompson and Dr. Stack can talk to this, but, just getting talent for faculty and others, I think is a challenge that's growing.
Yeah, you raised a point, Kevin, I think it's crucial. And I'm going to speak up for Ben Brandstetter does. Well, I mean, we're going to need to import more talent. We're going to need to keep more talent in this state for us to reach where we need to go, and even beyond the 60 by 30. So we need to think of our students not just in one bucket. When we think of equity, I also think about people coming in at a high performance level. We see many of our students dropping out because they see no use for college or that they're not challenged. So to me, this is a multiplicity that we have to think about from a learner's perspective. So it's not, yes, we have to make sure that we reach out and not leave our most disenfranchised behind. But we're also going to have to think about this in the terms of high expectations, high rigor, and input that's needed for all of the people above. I have a son and a daughter both in college, and they're different kinds of students. My one son is a very high performer. My other daughter, because of dyslexia, is a high performer, but she had to work in a different manner to get there. And I would have been very unhappy and both my kids stayed in the state, but I've been unhappy if we lost that talent because we couldn't serve both of those students. So I think that's important. And I think, Lee, you brought in another point that's crucial. We're also going to have to think about what does it mean for our Kentucky schools to be able to attract best talent and stay with best talent. That takes on a whole other element that is crucial to this conversation.
I'll put on my faculty hat for a minute here. And one of the things that we see is that we're in the Kentucky salaries for professors, that sort of thing, are in the 4th and 5th quintile from or next to the bottom or at the bottom in salaries. Now, we can justify some of that by saying cost of living isn't what it would be on the coast and that sort of thing. Regardless, we have a number of faculty that come to the research universities, the comprehensives, and leave after a while because they're offered better positions. And when it comes to diversity issues, we have a very difficult time keeping minorities employed as faculty for, well, 2 reasons. One is salary. The other is so many of, particularly the comprehensives, don't have a good community network that the underrepresented minorities need to keep them satisfied, and they move on to where they are more accepted.
Thank you. I want to pull apart for just a few minutes the second bullet, immediate and lasting effects of the pandemic. What are some of those effects that you see that are going to be a challenge in reaching that 30 by 60 or developing a statewide strategic agenda?
I think and I just know this from some of the people I know who have young adults going to college who have opted out for a year or 2 because of the pandemic. They just don't see the value in online classes. So they say, if you're going to take a gap year or 2, take it now. Or on the other hand, it's why do I want to pay those high dollars to go to a school when I can go to the community college and knock out some of those prerequisites as long as they transfer over.
Thank you.
And piggybacking on
Kate's
that is I'm sorry.
Kevin, go
I
ahead.
was just, okay, piggybacking on that as somebody who has a freshman right now in college. Fortunately, she's very driven and I'm not worried about her wanting to get out, but I know some of her friends who went expecting something very different as all of us normally would. And this is a very different experience. And even though they're questioning whether they want to go back next year or wait until this is really all over so that they can get the full experience that they are missing this year.
Thank you.
We heard exactly that from our student group, Kevin, exactly that. Many were not happy with the experience that they received, but it was as much for the social experience as it was for the academic experience. But they did say the academic experience wasn't nearly what they wanted. Now, the interesting piece, and we all know college, even though we may be too old to remember, I mean, you do a lot of your academic stuff in a social environment, in a co-curricular environment. So we had a lot of our high performing students say, well, they may be able to take off. Now, the interesting part of that is if you're upper middle class or middle class, you can take the gap year and you will come back. The people that don't come back are some of the other folks that we're also discussing. So that's an effect of the pandemic, I think, is that people are feeling as if they can't do it because maybe they can't do technology or they won't get the help they need. If they stay out a year, it's not a gap year for them. That may be a gap decade. That may be a longer time. So I think that's another element we need to think about.
If
I
I could,
also think it's your incoming freshmen for the next few years. Nobody really knows what the impact will be, but some of our students, even in-state, have yet to be face-to-face and have disengaged quite a bit. We know that across the board. And so I think the preparedness is going to be tough over the next few years to ensure students are ready for college level work and rigor. I think that will be a challenge.
I
You
think
think about those first time students, college, they're, I guess how their first year experience is and how disenfranchised they may or may not be based upon their first setting. Again, I think we'll definitely see an impact there.
My granddaughter is a student at Colorado College. And my son, her father, is asking a question that's not student debt, but in this case, parent debt. Why am I spending this much money at a private school to have online courses that can be available for a much less cost?
Well, I think people are starting to, I don't want anybody to think that the problems we faced with COVID, with students now thinking not getting the experience and it's not worth that. I think that's been amplified since COVID began, but I think it's a sentiment that students have started to hold a while. I mean, increasingly the burden is shifting on students to pay for this education, and nobody here spends money on anything they don't think's worth it. So the more expensive college gets, the less students are thinking it's actually worth it, in my opinion, especially with the rising salaries in different vocational areas of work. And so it's that immediate gratification that why would they pursue this degree when they could go be a plumber or something for an immediate higher salary than they could be making over 4 years. So even when we're out of COVID, I think, again, it's not just going to solve the issues, because this is a sentiment for years people have been having, that they don't know if it's worth their money and their time. And I think that's what we have to try to show them that it is. But like I said, I don't think it's just because of COVID that this sentiment's starting to happen. It's just amplified by it.
Thank you. So you all did a good job warming up, thinking about the issues. And that's where I want to go to talk about key input. Now that we've opened up the subject, what would you say that you need to know in order to make recommendations for a statewide agenda? What is it that you need to know? And this can be as broad or as specific as it comes to you.
It's been mentioned already, but one of the things that I need to know or we have reinforced is what is the impediment to timely completion for these students or persistence within the curriculum.
Thank you.
And for me, it's, as always, I have to look at managing this process, since I guess it'd be mine to manage, is do I have the right butts in the right seats, the number of butts I need in those seats? In other words, is the capacity correct, right? And does it fit within an organizational community that I run? I mean, there's certain things we can do, certain things we can't do. We use our power. We probably use our power far more than what I really had or what we really had, and which is good. I mean, the power of influence is powerful, but I would say capacity, and that's not just for me, but where the rubber meets the road too, you know. So that would be another concern. Not a concern, but what I would have to think about.
Thank you.
You know, one of the things that we've thought about as staff and that we think would be helpful to this process would be doing an assessment of sort of key areas of progress in other states. You know, I think for us to position ourselves against our partners, both close to us and around the country, I think would be helpful in giving the board a sense of what is potentially possible.
Thank you.
What are the workforce needs out there?
Is that current reality or future or both?
Yes.
And if it's helpful, my next question is going to be who? Who do you need to hear from? And so if it's easier for you to think about it in those terms, because I think Dr. Thompson mentioned students and getting students more involved. So if it's easier for you to think in that terms, then we can do that too. So it's students. What is it important to find out from students? What do you want to know? What do you want to hear from them?
Yeah, I think I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to speak up in this, but I would think that we've got quite a bit that we're already building upon. And so if we've got a lot of data and from our listening tours and from other things we're already pulling, just making sure that we have the most available, I would assume. But I'm sure there's still some pieces missing in there.
Having the most available, most current, Heather?
Correct, which I think we do. But like President Thompson said, we do have, you know, our student group now. And so I think they can provide quite a bit of feedback. You know, they are a small group, but they're not going to be the only ones that we can get feedback from. So, you know, the more we can hear direct from the customer, I guess the better. I'm not sure. But.
Okay, thank you.
Another group, I think it's key for us to be hearing from is actually the high school counselors. I know it sort of crosses over into the K-12 area, but now with our continuum, it's just really wonderful that our barriers are being sort of removed and blurred quite a bit. So I think that group has the firsthand insight into what is happening with the students. Why are we losing students? What is it that is not letting them take that next step into post-secondary? This is something that I wanted to bring up in our meeting the other day as well. Now that we're starting to rethink everything, a thought for Commissioner Glass and for Aaron, everybody else to be thinking about is what is the role of these what is the role of these counselors in this whole process? Are they even doing the right things in order to help us with the continuum? Are we expecting people that should be servicing an internal client and an external client to do two different jobs with the same set of people? When I say an internal client, the students are their internal clients. The external clients are the post-secondary institutions into which they need to allow the students to make a foray into. So how can the same people with the resource constraints and the time constraints that they have, how can they do this job effectively? So, if you were to talk to the counselors, we have hundreds and hundreds of students that are assigned to a counselor in a high school. How can they help them with scheduling? How can they help them with writing letters of recommendation? How can they help them with anything that comes up that needs to be attended to, and also be the effective advocates for those students finding the right educational institutions and getting them ready to go out? I just really do not believe that we are set up, the construct is not set up in the right way for some of these people to be that conduit to get these students into post-secondary. So this is a bigger and broader conversation, but we should be having these conversations because, is it time for us to be thinking about potentially a common group of people that are almost like consultants, that are counselors, but are taking high school students and helping them through this pathway into college? Or should the should the high schools be thinking about two sets of people within the institution itself, one that's serving the students for all the student needs and one that's strictly focused on nothing but college admission and college entrance? I know we're resource constrained, but we certainly, I believe that if we want to solve this problem, the pipeline problem and the pathway problem, we've got to go back and see where things are breaking down. And I know there's a lot breaking down at the counselor level within the high schools, because they are insanely resource constrained, and therefore students are not being serviced in a way that they need to get them out the door of a high school and into the doors of a post-secondary institution.
Yeah, it's the as I say, the ones, and they generally fall unfortunately in the category of the underserved or first-time students, is that those that have support, or parents, whatever you want to call support, that helps them get through that process. They know they're going to college. It's been put in there. They seem to do well or okay through that mainstream. It's that other group that don't have people that can help navigate. So
they don't have advocates.
I'm not going to go. I'll go do this.
There's no advocates for them. Nobody is advocating for those kids.
Yeah.
And it is a big, big part of the population within our schools that they have no advocates. They have no champions.
So and a lot of
we're trying to solve the problem on the back end of this, but the problem is really starting in a different spot. This is sort of just a symptom of what's already happening in those 4 years of high school before they even get to the end point.
Vidya, you summed up what we heard 5 years ago extremely well.
So some of the structures, actually, Vidya, that you spoke about actually are occurring in some of our districts where they have actually divided the duties. So they have more of a counseling suite instead of like one person being assigned 400, 500 students. Clearly, it's not in every high school or district by any means. And many, to your point, have actually hired college and career coaches who strictly focus on recruitment and of the slides that we shared the other day that KY Stats has, where it's showing college going rate with a high percentage. So, and I'm happy to share that whenever it's appropriate. It's on KY Stats. The ones, the districts that I visited that were in the dark blue, which had a higher percentage of post-secondary 2-year, 4-year college going, they tended to have a career coach or a counseling suite that were very strategic in nature, and they worked with within their community, and they also built the capacity of their teachers to be advisors, because the teachers are with the kids many, many days, and the counselors clearly aren't. To your point about extending, one human only has so many hours in a day with lots of student needs, and especially those who don't have advocates, not because they don't care, maybe they just don't know how to advocate for their child for education. And so there are good models in the state actually that I think would be really wise to help promote. And my hope is with this new connection with the continuum and intentional connections, like we have Stephanie Mayberry, who worked a lot with advising, talking with Damian Sweeney, who oversees the counseling work in the state by region. He works with the co-ops just to even start talking about common language and did you know? There's a lot of capacity building around that too if they don't have access to the coaches. And so you're right, but there are good models out there that I think could be used as promising practices that are working for some districts. If you look at their college going rate, there are things that they are doing, and it becomes a culture in the school of everybody's going to do something. And those who have embraced that, it's working. And those who have stuck with old school, it's working. It depends on really what your culture is. But I don't disagree with you, but I do think there are some things that is exactly what you're speaking to that some folks have figured out. It's not easy, and it's an investment of time and human resource, but it has had good outcomes.
What I'd be curious to see is where is it happening? Is it happening in the smaller districts, or is it happening in the larger districts? Is it happening in the 2 largest districts? Because if you can solve the problem in the 2 largest districts, you've really solved 80% of your problems, right? So trying to solve this problem in a place where they have maybe 200 kids graduating in a graduating class is not going to solve this problem in a hurry, not by a long shot. So the question is, what are we doing to solve the problem in the bigger districts?
Without getting in greater detail on this, I know we could go down a different route, but if you look at our larger districts, what you'll find is that it's not district-wide. You'll have some schools doing it really well and some schools not, right? And that's what you find. And, speaking as a Appalachian kid, you have to understand we think of it as school districts, but a little bit here we have to think of it as regional. And I want to be careful in how I say that, because I look at the dearth of availability of certain things we've taken for granted in Lexington, Kentucky, or Louisville. We just have. It may not work as well as we want to, but in some cases we've got it closer, right? So I think your point is exactly that. Part of what I heard last week, and I'd be anxious to hear what the board says about this, was that we know we're going to have to put a bigger effort on this P20 pipeline work. There'll be a variety of these examples. You've already brought up 5 so far, I've heard today. Right? So that what we're saying is that this is truly a call out about how we think about what our roles are in servicing these populations that you all are so eloquently discussing.
Thank you. Does this discussion bring up new ideas for you of new groups or questions?
I have a quick point before I get to the point I wanted to make about the whole counselor situation and helping high school students make that way to college. There's places like Lexington, to where my fiance went to Lexington, and every single Friday her senior year, they had off of class where they would go to a different internship place every single Friday, just to show them what college could grant. And then you go to Winchester, 30 minutes away, and I don't think I talked to my counselor once from junior or senior year. So I luckily had the parents that helped me do the college process. But on top of that, I went and spoke at another high school when I was my senior year at Moorhead. And he said that his counselor wouldn't even talk to him about college because he said that he didn't have the skills necessary for college, and so pushed him to do a work ready, which nothing wrong with vocational schools or vocational jobs, but this kid was kind of seen as not the typical college student, and so he wasn't even offered that assistance. It wasn't get your grades to this point or go look at this. He was just kind of dismissed. So I just wanted to put that in there. Second is, I think we have a lot of focus on what gets high school students to go to college. I'd like to see more information and discussion on what keeps somebody getting a 2-year degree from getting a 4-year degree. What keeps a teacher from no longer pursuing a master's because I mean, my mom's a teacher, so I turn a lot of things back on public school education, but they got rid of the master's degree requirement. And to me, it might be cynical of me, but I think it's just a way for the government to pay teachers less, is my opinion on it. That might be an unpopular opinion, but what are we going to do to incentivize them getting a master's degree? If nurses are only going to have to get a 2-year degree, like some places, why are they going to go get a 4-year degree? And again, it's going to lead to less pay from what my understanding is than if they would go get that stricter degree. So it's all about incentives for me, not just to go to college in the first place, but to further the college experience instead of just stopping halfway through.
Colby, you bring up something that I think we brought up here. If not, we're going to have to think about it. This strategic agenda, we need to be thinking about all the kinds of credentials and degrees we need in the state. We just can't think of the 2-year or the 1-year credential. We won't get where we need to go thinking that way. We have enough data to show exactly all the things we need. That's one thing you brought up. Number 2 thing you brought up is how do we get people to reskill or skill up to be able to move to the next level, right? And the third thing you brought up is we have to increase our transfer rate. If we're going to think about affordability, if we're going to think about a variety of other things, we've got to do a better job. Y'all saw that last week, right? I hope you saw it on the data. We just have to increase that. And the fourth thing is how do we really align everything from advising to the process of career knowledge, not just when they're in high school or middle school now we should be thinking about, but also in college. We tend to forget that we still have a lot of people dropping out or not getting the degree they want and being unhappy in their jobs because they really had no other direction. No one talked to them about that. So, I mean, I think all these points you brought up in just that one statement.
The screen says, who do you need to hear from? From what I'm gathering, we need to hear from the some community college faculty who possibly can address why students aren't going on, as well as some of the undergraduate faculty at both the regionals or comprehensives and the research, particularly in the arts and sciences area. What are they getting? What are they finding as far as the students coming in? And where do English majors end up teaching or going and that sort of thing? We need to find that out, and or are they being led into better or different pathways? I shouldn't say better, different pathways, because after all, the arts and sciences, English major, history major, end up doing quite well, but it takes them much longer time to get established in the community.
Thank you.
The CP's done great of it, and Dr. Thompson even more, but just students, high school students and the community college students as well. And even students that when I was on the board of student body presidents, we talked with students that didn't even pursue a degree and say, you didn't pursue a degree. And we asked them flat out, was it your choice or was it your circumstances? And kind of our motto for the entire year was we wanted to get to a point in Kentucky where everyone that didn't pursue an education, the choice was made by themselves and not from their circumstances.
Actually, in that regard, I think it was Dr. Cavoni last week said that they have quit calling those students undecided, but rather they are deciding. Just put a positive spin on it.
I like that.
Well, we're going too much and probably out of whack, but I like what everybody's saying. The other thing I just put on, Colby, when I look at student success, and I've talked to now thousands of students over the years, it's amazing that students make choices without understanding if they're choices or not. So a part of it is even if they decide, they may not have enough real information to decide, right? So that's what they need. It's kind of like this. I mean, you all have heard of choice theory. If you go to a restaurant and you have a menu with 60 items on it, you'll take forever to choose. And when you choose, you still wish you had gotten something else. Versus if you go to a restaurant with 5 items on, everything you order, you will love. You will know exactly the choice. So somehow we've got to get these 60 items down to 5 so students can make the choice and understand it's the right choice. And this is an issue I think we're going to have to really think about when we talk later on about curricular alignment, when we talk about degree plans, when we talk about all the things we know we have to increase that works towards student success.
Thank you. When you, and I'll zoom back up to it, when you look at these challenges in your discussion, who do you need to talk to when it comes to some of these issues that you haven't already identified?
Well, you need to talk to students, you need to talk to parents and families, you need to talk to the legislature, you need to talk to executive branches, you need to talk to advisors, you need to talk to counselors, you need to talk to mentors, you need to talk to employers, you know, and I'm sure there's a few more that I haven't. I mean, you need to talk to advocacy groups, you need to talk to researchers in student success and other areas. So these are all the people I think we have to put at the table with students leading the pack.
In other words, everybody that we influence or come in contact with.
All of our constituency, right?
Yep.
Thinking about the employers, what do you need to hear from them? What do you need to know?
We need to know what the technical skills they want and what are the employability skills they want, and whether or not they're willing to be partners with us to achieve both of those.
One of the things that we've heard, if correct me if I'm not right on, Aaron, but one of the things we've heard is that most employers are very willing to teach the skills, particularly the fine skills that are needed for the job. They don't need to come out of the universities or post-secondary education system with all those skills, but they need to come out with willingness to work ethic, and critical thinking is as important as any of these skills, because the employer will teach them the skills to meet the employer's needs.
You hit the nail on the head. I call those skills you just mentioned that employers want us to do more of. Now I've heard from hundreds of employers telling me this. We call those employability skills or essential skills. And that's what they're asking us to do. We call, you know, that's the quality of education. By the way, we also know that when students feel like they have those skills, they're more than likely to tell you they also got a quality education, far more than if they just learn pure technical skills. So a part of this is also going to the quality argument, Dr. Stack.
Anything else you want to hear from employers or industries?
Maybe about not just the skill sets that they need out of the students, but whether they realize or use to promote their situation to bring in good talent, the importance of education and just creating a positive living space, a culture and so forth in a community.
Okay. Thank you.
Amen. Also, we need to get from them the future of work. Where is their business going? They think about this at a very concrete, microscopic level, and sometimes we don't. So where do we need an education? Where do we need to actually what's the hockey puck analogy? Where do we need to hit the puck? Right? And so employers can help give us that information.
Actually, one of the things that we can ask the employers is what's the potential for building internships or even small internships so students get an exposure to their business and what the business environment is. We could use more of those.
Thank you. How about legislators, governor's office? What do you need to know from them?
I'll let others talk for a minute, but I got a long list if they want to fill it out. Okay.
I have a long list of legislators who have refused to talk to students for the past 6 years, so I'd love to know why there.
Well, I think one of the things we need to know from legislators is, they hear a lot from their constituents, and they tend to filter that through, or they're filtering what they hear through their constituents, and often they just hear from one or two. But what do they think the system needs to do? Obviously many of them don't believe we're doing what we need to do, but I don't know that they've clearly articulated what they think that we should be doing.
My sons who work in restaurants, we just had that conversation last night that if you get an unhappy customer, the best thing to say is, what can I do to make this right? So that sounds like that's your question. What can we do to make this right if you're unhappy?
Yeah, I think that gets it.
I think what we need from the legislature is to also start thinking critical and creative about how higher ed is a strategic investment and not just another item state. I mean, not just another sum that sucks up the money. So we need for them to understand the return on investment at what I call a very deeply strategic level.
Yeah, you need to connect the connection between higher ed and workforce with them, and the economic development side, all those pieces that play a role with each other.
And Lori, going along with that, truly, at 60 by 30, we need to not just educate our legislature, but everybody on this list, that this is a very strategic goal that we have and why. You're absolutely right. It's connecting our economic development, our employee development, our workforce development. It's connecting also our health development, if you think about higher ed. It's connecting our tax base. All the things that we need to really educate. And I want to say this in a non-pejorative way, so you'll figure out how to write that down, I'm sure, Stephanie. But the idea that a part of this is having everybody understand why we have this goal. It's just not something we pulled out of the air for no reason.
You said it very, very well, Aaron, and I would have been a little more crass by saying we need to educate the legislators better, but
that's just the difference between us and Bob, and you and me, Bob. I'm a lot more nuanced, okay? Just
So other groups or any that you want to tease out Faculty was mentioned. Are there other things you need to know from the campuses?
I'd like to see faculty and students work closer together. I know there's not a facilitation discussion there, but I think oftentimes students and faculty can accomplish both of their needs along the same lines.
Okay, thank you.
We need a lot more co-curricular input too. I mean, if you think about the elements of student success, the first is truly faculty interaction with students in and out of the classroom, but the next top three are all co-curricular processes. So we need to have advisors input, a variety of other folks getting engaged with us, student affairs, a lot of different things, right? So to me, I think and I know our staff is doing a really good job with that, but we need to work with them to give them tools, and they need to work with us to give us tools about how we can do our jobs better in that area.
And I think we should note with the faculty input, just that we would need to be very strategic in getting their voice, because certainly faculty are embedded in academic disciplines and departments. And so their perspective is going to vary a good bit depending on their discipline and their area. And so I really like the idea that community college faculty Dr. Statt talked about, and I think we'll just have to be strategic in how we collect feedback from the group.
Thank you.
One last piece, Stephanie, I think we need to make sure that we stratify these items, and get everybody's voices. A Black student from Clay County, Kentucky may sound different than a white student that went to Louisville Doss. So we need to make sure that we're hearing this. We need to make sure we get diverse perspectives from diverse folk. We need to make sure we're listening to those beyond just the academic realm, but those that may be in emotional, social, mental health, cultural health, and all those other pieces that now are very much not a concern. Now they're a concern, but there are things we should be looking at when we think of student success as a whole and student learning.
Mm-hmm.
That's broad-based around all those groups. In other words, we need to make sure we're very diverse in all these different areas between parents, employers, students, advocacy groups, things like that.
Do you all have suggestions on how to how to access those groups that maybe feel like their voices are not being heard? Do you have strategies or suggestions to help those groups be engaged?
Could I throw in one more group before we go into that? Beyond the legislators, maybe some more of the community leaders, the mayors, the council people, and so forth, about how it can benefit their community and getting their buy-in into this whole picture. They can't specifically assign the dollars, but they do have some influence with the legislators, and they are perceived as leaders in their communities and influencers.
I think what Kevin is saying is hitting really a good spot, because I think we have to, once again, stratify these elements. When we think of our local business leaders, local chambers, when we think of our local elected leaders, when we think of truly the local workforce boards. All of these have to become our constituency, if you will. And it looks different than if you're talking about the General Assembly or if you're talking about the statewide chamber, right? So his point, I think, is very spot on. And it's going to look different. And that's why they have to be engaged, because a local community in far western Kentucky may not be the same as a local community in eastern Kentucky with their particular needs for higher ed. So I really appreciate that.
We keep talking about groups that with the needs and that sort of thing. I just came up with the thought that maybe we should look at the other end, and that's the very successful private high schools around the state. in that they have probably 95% college going rates. What makes them different than some of, besides the student population? Are they doing something different? Do they have different programs to incentivize these students? What's their message?
Okay, my last statement of the day, I won't jump back in anymore, I promise. And for those who know me, know that's a lie. But,
Yeah, I do.
But Bob raises a point. Although we don't set the strategic agenda for our private colleges, let's say, our private colleges buy into our agenda. They represent 25% of all the students that we represent as a council that goes in Kentucky. So this 60/30 is gained through input from our private institutions also and our private feeder schools. So it is important that we think about hearing their voice and not just think of this, even though this is a public agenda, it's a public agenda that in fact our private schools that we license, by the way, have a big input on. So I really appreciate you not leaving that out, Dr. Stead.
So I want to go back to this stratify voices to hear all voices, because I have a couple of questions around that. Are there particular voices that you think are more underrepresented than others? That when it comes to what their needs are or what their thoughts are, you don't have a really good handle on it?
Well, I'll use students as an example. When we did our student group, we made sure we had adult learners, had people not from just middle class backgrounds. Sometimes when you get student groups, the people that fall in those are people that are more informed, and they tend to be higher performing academic students, or they tend to be from places of more income. So I would argue that it needs to be big. We have an issue with adult learners. We have to think about that. Our veterans, we have to think about that. We have to also think about people that are teaching in our liberal arts areas as well as our STEM areas, which is different. We have to think about what does a general education look like for the future. We got to hear from those groups. We got to hear from faculty leaders as well as student leaders in addition to others. So all of those, I keep on going forever. You get where I'm going. We have to hear from our Office of Institutional Diversity. We have to hear from our ADA offices. All of these folks have voices that in many times felt unheard. So I think that's crucial. We have to hear from populations that serve our dual credit people. Are there people that servicing high schools? Whether it's AP or dual credit. I mean, all of these folk are going to help us to think about whether or not we're doing the right things to stay on our agenda. And so that's what I mean when I say that.
Okay.
And I would add on to that we need to be intentional on being regional, because our state is so diverse by region. And the cultural beliefs and value systems they vary across our state. And I think we need to recognize that. And to add on with the early post-secondary experience, I would also include those who coordinate work-based learning experiences, whether it's internships or whatever that may be. That perspective is very unique and can help connect dots with the workforce and either our secondary education or post-secondary ed of really being meaningful, because it tells the rest of the story, depending on where you go regionally in our state, of what's valued and what's invested in. And so I think we would be remiss if we weren't intentional on that piece. And even with the different experiences of the diversity of our state regionally and ethnically, it's just very different. So I just think we need to capture that. Exactly what does that look like? Not sure, but I do think it is important because it's very different stories.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So key individuals groups, we've got high school counselors, successful private high schools, community college and comprehensive university faculty, private institutions, co-curricular input, students from all levels, making sure to stratify voices to hear all voices for all these groups, parents, employers, which could also include the local WIBs, legislators, advocacy groups, community leaders. And we've got these topics, plus we identified some up here in the blue. What is the impediment for timely completion or persistence, capacity, assessment of key areas in other states, current and future workforce needs, current data, and leveraging direct voices, increasing transfer rate, aligning advising to career knowledge. How do we get people to reskill or go to the next level? What credentials do we need in the state? What keeps someone from going on to advance their education? And what are the incentives for more advanced degree or further college degree? What are we missing?
Would another group possibly be with going back to the topic of those, some of the talent that we may have lost, actually the people that we've lost, whether they're students or faculty that have moved on to get their input, kind of like exit interviews, but to get their input on what might have kept them here.
Throw alumni in there too. I mean, people that may have moved on, what helped them to be successful? How do they see the connection? Kevin, I think you're right. And the other group I would throw in, since we spent a lot of time on this, would be what I call the national influencers, whether they're the foundation folks or, you know, a lot of people. I mean, we play in that arena. You all may or may not know this. Kentucky's a big player. I spend half of every week playing in that arena, talking about what we're doing in Kentucky. So, you know, so having the national influencers as a part of this conversation, I think would be important, whether it's foundations, whether it's educational organizations like SHIO, or whether it's, you know, in my case, is in some cases would be talking to the U.S. Department of Education even. So, I mean, there's a lot of other pieces that we have to consider and hear from.
Thank you. Okay, so if anything else comes up before we adjourn, we can certainly add to it. I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the timeline again. It's my understanding this needs to be wrapped up by September. Is that correct?
I'll take my leanings from my chair and of this committee and leave, but that would be my ideal for sure. Because I think you could take something on way too long and not get started. It'd be nice if we could have this thing finished up and sealed with a kiss by January 1 of next year. I mean, and to do that, we need to really have something done around September. But Lori, I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I don't, again, as long as we can kind of keep some meetings happening and people engaged, I don't want to linger on for over a year, that's for sure.
Actually, September to me makes sense because we can get it wrapped up, get it nice and polished, and it'll be ready for the legislature when they meet in January.
Yeah.
You're thinking like I am, Dr. Stat. Thank you.
That's scary.
That's scary. I know. I don't want to admit that for sure. I take it back. This is being recorded. I didn't say it.
Well, one of the things that potentially would take some time is target setting with the campuses. So one thing the board might consider is, you know, adopting the agenda and the structure of the accountability system in September, but then taking the fall to really work closely with the campuses on establishing performance targets. So David, I might get you to weigh in on that.
I think that's right, Lee. I was going to make the same comment, but I would say that we should probably nail down the measurements and the metrics used by September with the process, because I think the issue that we've run into, not necessarily in this case, but in strategic planning in general, is oftentimes we'll look at measurements after we create the initiatives. And it'd be better to have that nuance, that negotiation of which metrics would appropriately measure these initiatives with this committee.
David, and when I say process, I'm talking about having that done, and even for a way, and I'm thinking this way, I'd like to know by then, I'd like to know actually a little bit before then, is exactly what kind of budget I need to start attaching to these efforts. And that needs to be done for me not too long after July 1. So I think you're right. So when I say September, I'm talking about having, as Dr. Stat just said, I think, is to have the rough draft with all these things connected that we can then start vetting the entirety of it and have it polished and pretty by January 1.
And I'm not all opposed to a lot of the metrics that we have. So we've got to me, we've got a head start on that one.
Amen. I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but this is so important to us, I think. Dr. Stat, once again, I want to agree with you. Some of these things we don't have to recreate. I mean, some of these are furthering just the agenda metrics with some new directions maybe about what's worked, what's not worked. Some of these items we need not to change. We need to still be closing gaps, right? We still need to be measuring how many degrees and credentials. We may need to tweak it on what kind we need now versus the last time. Some of these items I think we're not talking about recreating the wheel on many of these.
That's correct.
And I'll just add to President Thompson's comments that I think since we did the midterm review of the strategic agenda and President Thompson's listening tour and the continuous conversations with the board, that we have a lot of ideas about the metrics that might help us better assess what we're currently doing. And so I have a pretty comprehensive list already that I think you guys will be happy with, that we can talk further. But to President Thompson's point, we really do have a scaffolding effect, here where we've built on a lot of the work that's already been done.
Well, knowing you, David, and your attention to detail, is it your list under 300?
It is.
Great. So there were a couple of ideas that were added to the chat. If you want to take a look at those. One, for example, was enrollment management, admissions, financial aid officers as a voice, research faculty, KWIB members, youth service center directors, the Friskies. Good additions in the chat too.
Well, I can't go in great detail now, but I had a very detailed conversation with one of our leaders this morning. So I think we'll also need to be thinking about certain other groups we'd be working with, everything from, urban leagues to criminal justice folks. I mean, a lot of these things are going to be key elements to the next agenda. If we think about, in our courts, drug enforcement, things we really haven't in the past thought about before, but now it's crucial to the way that we are doing this holistic business. So I would, and we're not going to get them all, right? We're not going to remember them all, but these are all pieces that I'm sure we'll remember like 30 more after we get off of this.
All right. Any final suggestions of topics or groups or anything else on the timeline? If not, it appears we have reached all of our outcomes for today, and with 9 minutes to spare, you all are superstars. I don't have anything else. Dr. Thompson or Lee, anything you all want to share to wrap it up?
I don't have anything but say we've got some real experts in this group here, and I don't want to forget that. Even though we may not can incorporate everything you got to offer, period. I know I won't get all the stuff I got to offer in, but I would argue that some of you are really experts in some area, and I'm only using Biddy as an example because I know some of the things that she's doing. It would be great if somehow we could, as we start breaking this out more into our operational items for the plan or for the agenda, that we maybe can say, get some of that expertise and say, well, that could work, but you have to remember this, you know. So I would argue that we need to really hear those things that we know out loud, right, and have those discussions somewhere along the way.
I think Heather mentioned this, but I would like to put before the committee your all's interest in having additional meetings other than the ASI meetings that are scheduled. And it's not something you need to, definitively come back with now, but it seems to me that for this group to meet fairly regularly over the next 6 to 8 months would be a good idea.
I have no problem with that.
I agree with that.
I think that's one way we can keep it moving and keep it on track somewhat, and not get tied up in all the other stuff that we have to do on the ASI committee.
Right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a 2-hour meeting each time. I think that, for us to be able to bring back to you input that we've been able to gather from these groups that you suggested would be very important, and then knock out some other items that we need to be thinking about.
Did I hear you mention, David, that in order to get the data that they're going to need to review to start making some decisions, it's going to take a little bit, or was it something that we could have together soon?
We have some survey information, but there was some conversation of what else we would need to collect.
That may impact when the next meeting is. That's the only reason I
Yeah.
asked. Our current meeting is, the next one is scheduled for March 23rd. So it's a matter of, is that too far? Because that's 6 weeks from now. Would we get behind in the process? Would it, that's where I just want to keep going.
And somewhere along the way, I don't think you put it up there, Stephanie, we need to really look at the strategic planning efforts that we have going on in the state now with other groups that's going to impact us, whether it's from the campuses, whether it's from Pritchard, who has their big, bold agenda that talks about post-secondary, whether it's from Kentucky Department of Education, early childhood education, all of those things we're going to have to triangulate somewhere along the way. What we don't want to do is get totally out of balance with those because they've also done a lot of environmental scan. They've done a lot of SWOT analysis already. So part of these things are important, I think, for us to remember and so somewhere along the way, we probably should invite some of those people to come in and talk to us for 15 or 20 minutes and listen to their environmental scan inputs and what their plan looks like and how they derived where they were going. And many of these people have brand new plans that they just came out where post-secondary is core to their plan. So I would throw that in there too. When I had the other outside groups, advocacy groups and other things I had on there, that's what I was talking about.
Aaron, you just mentioned getting people together for 15, 20 minutes, that sort of thing. Here at the dental school, I chair a committee called Student Progress and Promotions Committee, and we have to have hearings on occasion for students that haven't succeeded very well. And we've been using a hybrid approach. Both some people feel more comfortable coming in video, but we have seating arranged so that we're separated, and we do end up with a better conversation with those in present as opposed to the tube or the camera. So a hybrid meeting, it would be appropriate at this point. It's been successful.
How does the group feel about hybrid meetings?
I think we've been directed by the governor to continue to meet virtually for state government purposes. And so I'm not sure, that's why we haven't been able to meet in person at all yet. I'm not sure beyond that, but that's the last directive that I've been given.
Okay, thank you.
Well, how about staff here follow up with this group to solicit your input on future meetings? I think that there might be some value in having sort of a short get together before your next scheduled meeting, but that's certainly up to the chair in this group. But, we'll talk about what kind of agenda items we could bring you at that time.
That's fine with me.
Okay,
Well, thank you all very much.
thank you. So is there anything else that needs to come before the ASI? If not, I appreciate everybody's time and involvement. I think we kind of started slow, but then we were picking up. So I appreciate that today. So thank you all very much, and I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you
Chair.
all. Thank you.
Since we're off the thing, I apologize for Bob.